Welcome to the Today Counts show. Today does count because it impacts, it influences your tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. The Today Counts podcast is sponsored by the generous donors of the Lead Today community. I'm your host, Kim Piper. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Today Counts show. Hey, today I have a guest from the same city in which I live, or approximate area. His name is Darryl Lyons, and Darryl Lyons is the co-founder and the CEO of PAX Financial Group. I have also found out that he is a man of faith. He's also the author of Biblical Responsible Investing. So I'm going to enjoy this conversation. I'm sure you will as you listen to us. Welcome to the show, Darryl.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to just have a dialogue with you.
Yeah, great. Hey, let's jump right in. So, we share something together in the sense of starting something from, I'm assuming, scratch. I'm assuming you have a background, in financial planning or investing or, however you would label that. So why did you start PAX Financial Group? How long ago did you do it? But what's your why behind it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been an interesting journey. When I'm from Castroville originally, which is just outside of San Antonio, going west. And I remember I was edging the trailer that we lived in. We lived in a little mobile home on the side of the highway, and I was edging the skirting. You got to be careful when you edge it because if you get too close, it'll break the skirting, the plastic white skirting. And I thought to myself, it'd be really cool to have a house with a foundation. Like, how do people have houses with foundations? Like, that would be great. And I remember in town, there was a friend of mine, and her dad was president of a bank. So I thought, being a banker, that would make sense. I think they have nice houses. So I went to St. Mary.
They have nice houses.
Yeah. So then I went to St. Mary's University.
Okay.
And I ended up working at Bank of America, and that's how I paid my way through school. So it was a wonderful experience working at Bank of America. I didn't stay in that space because about 99, when I had graduated, was when Nations and Bank of America merged. And a lot of my mentors and peers were laid off or, went different directions. So I scratched my head and I thought, I've got a degree in accounting, another one in finance. What do I do? And I found this area of being a financial planner at the time, certified financial planner. So I thought that'd be a very good industry for me based on what I had learned in college and working at the bank. But I was really naive to what it took to be successful in this space because I did not know rich people. I knew people in trailer parks and college kids. And so I had a really rough go at it, but ended up surviving and, was obviously a struggle. Worked for a big firm, was going to head to New York or Chicago, and met my wife, and we decided to stay here. Me and a couple other guys along that journey decided that we were becoming a little bit disenchanted with kind of how the big corporations work. They generally try to, and there's variations of how they do this, but push the products through the advisors, and that didn't resonate with us. So we decided to just go out on our own and be completely independent of any big institution, and that's when we started PAX. That was about 17 years ago. Yeah.
17 years ago. That's great. Well, yeah. So you already covered, another place where we have crossed, maybe not the month and year. So I got you by a few years, I think. But so I worked for Bank of America from 1980 to 1987, back in the day where a bank manager actually made loans and worked with the client and went out and hobnobbed with the clients. The retail banking today has completely changed. The face has changed. The delivery system has completely changed. But it kind of reminded me. You used the term naive. I think I was very naive as well. I was naive in lots of things. I grew up in a Christian home, and I was sheltered somewhat with a lot of the darkness that can be in the world. And so I wasn't really prepared to deal with some of the shysters out there.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got some education on that. But I also began to understand more the phrase that the love of money, not money. Money by itself is not evil. It's a tool, a source of exchange. But the love of money is evil. And I certainly got baptized into that understanding, being in the financial a world. I think it's interesting about your beginning and how difficult, it was, because I kind of felt like a fish out of water myself when I got into banking, because even in my early 20s, well, first of all, Bank of America paid for my last 2 years of uh, my undergrad, and that's a whole nother story. Uh, but some of the things that I learned, through the process, was that I was a fish out of water. My dad was a postmaster, so I mean, he made a good living, but to call us wealthy would be an exaggeration. My mom was a traditional stay-at-home mom. She had 4 kids, so to say we were middle class, I guess back in the 1960s and 70s, middle class looks different than it did now. But I was working with multimillionaires, and I was just a kid that was buying my business clothes at a discount store.
Yeah.
Wow. trying
Yeah.
to fake my way, through that, navigate through that society. But and yeah, I guess I was going to say too, Darryl, that I mean, um, I don't want to discount your profession at all, because probably one of the most frustrating things that all of us who are listening to this podcast go through is, who can I trust? Who do I
Yeah.
who do I get to advise? And I'm one of those guys now in my life where, back in my 30s and maybe early 40s, I was managing all of my finances, my investing, and what have you, and it is more than a full time job. Um, and so I did want to get into a relationship with an advisor that I felt, had their hand on the wheel. Not that I'd completely look away, because that's not my, personality. So for you to be here 17 years later, what I'm trying to say is
Mhm.
that's quite a feat. So congratulations
Yeah.
on
Thank you.
that.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this. I've got all kinds of questions for you, but
Sure. Yeah.
let's talk about this book that you wrote,
Sure.
Biblical Responsible Investing. So, as a
Yep.
person of faith,
That's it.
your
Yeah.
your manual, great. Your manual there
Hmm.
is that you have written for us. So, why did you write that? And maybe give us a quick overview.
Yeah. During COVID, I I've always been curious about money ever since that time, when I was edging, and I've never stopped being curious about money, and deep curiosity, and not in a selfish ambition way. I mean, there's over 2,000 scriptures about money, so when I read the Word of God, there's a lot to be said about money. Um, but when COVID happened, I just started thinking, I really would like to study more in this space. I have a couple degrees and a bunch of letters behind my name, but I still wanted to study more. So I found out that Texas A&M Law School had a program on wealth management. So it's a master's of jurisprudence. So I did that program for 2 years, and when I was doing that program, I had to write a paper on something that was passionate of mine. And when I wrote this paper, my intention was to try to, because I had some key strategic relationships with Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, some of the big, large institutions. I was on some advisory councils with them, and so I had some conversations with some people in powerful positions. So I wanted to try to make a case that they need to think critically about how they customize their products and services to the Christian community. And I was trying to make the case, and that was the purpose of the paper. It really fell on deaf ears. I mean, I had some good conversations, but really nobody was willing to champion something like that. Even though 55% of the world's wealth is held by people who are Christians. So they, the story. I mean, basically they've all kind of gone woke, for lack of a better word, and discounted the deeply held convictions of believers. And so that content fell on deaf ears. But when I visited the content, I realized that there's a consumer benefit of learning what I wrote, and what I meant by that is that there's a certain way of thinking that Christians had about money that was different. And you think about like the secular world playing chess and the Christian world playing checkers. There's a deeply held different type of motivation that existed. Not only that, but actually there was unique products that were manufactured in the marketplace that suited Christians well. And so what I was thinking about doing as I kind of adjusted the script, or just adjusted the paper, was how do I help really anybody, because it really is helpful for even those that aren't believers to understand the motivations of Christians when it comes to money are different. And then what are also some of the financial innovations and tools that are helping to support some of those different ways of thinking. And so I bridge those things together and put it together in the book called Biblical Responsible Investing.
In your that's great. In your book, do you talk about this dilemma? For example, if you just blindly invest in a mutual fund, you could also be investing in companies that do not align, with your values, which I think is a dilemma.
Yeah, very much so. I had been aware, being in this industry for a long time, that 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 existed. I had a hard time because we have a responsibility as fiduciaries. So I had a hard time um, executing the strategies that existed, because there were biblical strategies that screened out companies that were behaving antithetical to a biblical worldview. So that marketplace, it existed, that a consumer could actually invest their money in companies that they believed in. That existed. That's been around a long time. My problem with adopting that is I thought the costs were too high and the performance was poor. And so I watched it from the outside looking in and had a hard time with the adoption of it. There in about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there had been major breakthroughs to me from where I sat in terms of innovation and thought leadership in that space that gave me enough confidence. And there was enough research that supported it that allowed me to say, okay, I can not only honor that fiduciary responsibility, but also be able to start screening out companies that were behaving antithetical, are actually companies not only just behaving antithetical to biblical worldview, that were directly undermining religious freedom as we know it. And so that's actually been one of the most important elements of biblical responsible investing, is not only disowning some of these companies, but also um, at being an advocate. So there's three elements, just kind of high level. There's three elements of this biblical responsible investing space. There's not only avoiding companies that you don't want to own, maybe like Target as a great example, um, but then there's also embracing companies that you believe in, maybe some companies that are doing breakthrough things in Alzheimer's. But then there's also the advocacy piece, which would be the third piece, and that's um, allowing some of these institutions. So usually, when you invest in a mutual fund or exchange traded fund, there's a corporate structure that actually can be an advocate that can go to these companies and say, we've got a group of investors that disagree with what you're doing. That advocacy piece is actually one of the most exciting pieces that I've seen lately, because there's been a major shift in corporate America because of these advocates, because Christians have started to invest their money differently. They've actually started to move the needle back away from the trends that were happening in corporate America. And it's through their investing that that power is being kind of shifted back.
That's good. I don't know if it's still around, but I remember probably in the mid '90s, I subscribed to kind of a investing club. I think it was called Sound Mind Investing, and it kind of walked right down the lines that you're describing here. Um, when your clients, Darryl, talk to me about that. Or do you market specifically to Christians? Do you have a broader target market? What does that? Yeah, maybe describe who your clients are.
Yeah, we have, I mean, we have atheists, we have people who have beliefs that are different than even, I mean, mine. And one of our core values at our company is to honor, or it really is to respect. It's the word respect that we use, to respect everyone's unique life story. So people come in here and ask us to do good work for them, and we want to do good work. And if they have deeply held convictions regarding screening out their investments, then we'll lean into that way. If they don't, we still use secular strategies as well. So we're very comfortable. That may not be something that other firms would do, but we're very comfortable being able to serve others. We feel that's an important role for us, and so it actually um, it's actually a passion point for us, because really, when it comes down to it, we're giving hope to people. Um, and there's just a vacuum of that right now. There's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of noise. And so when we sit down with people, we can actually, go through a process. We actually have a process that helps people think critically about their money, cerebrally about their money, and not worry about all the nonsense that's out there.
Is there a perfect client? Let's talk about your process. You have this process. I would imagine that there are some people that they really don't fit that process for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And then you have those that just are like what's the term, hand in glove, and it's
Yeah.
kind of what they were
Yeah.
looking for. Who is that hand in glove client that you think, oh man, this would be just a great marriage?
Usually they're about 5 years out from retiring, or
Oh,
we
okay.
don't even, yeah, we don't even think about retiring. We call it pivoting.
Yeah.
Because retirement by definition is the disposal of an asset that's no longer useful. And going back biblically, that really doesn't resonate with me, nor does it resonate with my deeply held convictions. So we want people, if they give us a 5 year runway, we can help them pivot well and kind of think through a lot of things. And that could be everything from how do we navigate health insurance and Medicare to how do we properly set up distributions in a tax efficient way. So there's a lot of work that we can do to provide value. So that's an ideal scenario. And then to add on to that, if they own a business, we feel like we're pretty good in that space as well. We've got some business succession planning tools. We utilize 401ks, so we've got some skills there to be able to help people. So if they're about 5 years away from retirement, they're a business owner, we feel that we can stand out.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics say. I haven't studied from that point, but it seems to me that particularly with the baby boomers, the pivot, as you call it, um, seems to be more and more prevalent. That mindset seems to be more and more prevalent. I know that for me, whenever my consciousness kind of wakes up and go, oh my gosh, I am retirement age. But I've never thought of retiring. I've never really understood the purpose of getting up and having nothing to do in that traditional point. And I thought, well, taking 5 strokes off my handicap, I'm not sure that's a purpose that gets me up in the morning, and that gets me excited.
Mhm.
Do you know of stats, or is this also what you are seeing, that, maybe I'm not putting in 60 hours a week anymore, but to say that I'm done or that I have retired, I've been put out to pasture. Uh, I mean, that's if I'm 80 and I'm healthy, I see myself, whittling at something, working at something, teaching something probably, coaching something probably. But what is that? Is that what you are
Yeah,
experiencing more and more?
yeah, and I've spent a lot of time studying this topic and deeply thinking about it, and actually, um, I have a podcast as well. It's called Retire in Texas, and
Hmm,
the first year of that podcast, every week I interviewed somebody who had pivoted, who had retired. And so
that's a great
I've,
idea. Yeah.
50 interviews of people and just their stories of how they did it, their fears, what they could have done better. It was wonderful to do. And I did that because I had been working with these people for years, and I was like, man, I know their stories and they've impacted me, but I need to share these with other people.
Yeah.
So there's you have both this research and this anecdotal thing. So kind of colliding those two. What I do know is that heart attacks go up usually right after you retire, about 40%. So, um, why is that? Like physiologically, what happens when you retire? And a lot of times our identity is rooted in our vocation. And then research has shown that when you retire and you have purpose and a community, the health risks go down exponentially. And it's just kind of one of those things, how God wired us. He still you still have breath in your lungs, and so you still have purpose. And so living out that purpose manifests physiologically. You're actually healthier and less chance of having a stroke or heart attack. So when you pivot well and you pivot with purpose and within a community, you can pretty much count on better health than just Fox News and flower beds.
Yeah. I remember standing in church a couple years ago, and the worship team was unveiling a new song, and one of the lines kind of caught me by surprise. It says, "If you're not dead, he's not done." And
Yeah, yeah. It's so
um,
true. And especially now, the need for a generation, baby boomers specifically, to reach their hand down to the next generation
Yeah.
is necessary. It's much
Yeah.
needed. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like from an economic marketplace world, it's almost like two things um, need to happen. It's a little bit of a dance as I'm seeing it. It's like boomers get out of the way, but don't go away.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, man, we're sitting in chairs that younger people can sit in and probably should be sitting in. And if we can be a little bit more creative about how we can add value to those places, then again we have another great marriage happening. And the things that one of the things that I've noticed in my life, as in fact just last night here at the house we had, I don't know, like 10, 12 people in a circle. And we were talking about this and that. But, I think the person that was closest to my age was probably 15 years, something like that. And then it just went, slid off the cliff to,
Oh
I
wow.
mean, 40 years. And,
Wow.
and then just kind of hearing the questions and the things that we were talking about as, for baby boomers who are listening, sometimes you forget what you know. And when you're not in community, when you start isolating yourself, um, and I think there's an attitude that the younger generation has where they are interested. And maybe boomers sometimes think that they're either everybody knows this, whatever this is, when in fact they don't, or maybe no, they don't really care when they do. And a couple things to work through if you're trying to reinvent yourself, as we sometimes say. I think if I think about it, I think I'm in my third career right now.
Oh wow.
Yeah, third career, and I kind of see that I can do this until I move on. But on the other hand, I'm open. I'm
Yeah.
open. We'll see. We'll see what
That's
happens.
that's the right approach. And the one thing that I learned when I was just talking to all these people who had pivoted is the ones that seem to really thrive is that the ones that kind of and they did this kind of subconsciously, they didn't even know they were doing it, is they recognized that there was this climax of their life story that had that climax not occurred, they would not be the person they were today or are today. And that climax might be like somebody came along and helped them financially go to college, or
Mm,
somebody gave them a job or gave them a chance or something like that. There's just like these, every one of them had a climax. Is kind of cool to see. But the really beauty of it all is just is for those that were in that boomer stage is to say again, consciously or subconsciously, um, I'm going to go do that for other people. Like that made a difference in my life. I'm going to go do like because sometimes it's overwhelming to say, what do I do? Who do I reach? And it God doesn't waste anybody's story.
yeah.
And so it's like right in front of them. It's like, that's I need to be doing what somebody did for me back then or didn't do for me. And that's really where the beauty of God comes in, is he uses those stories in the latter part of life to as Romans 8:28 make all things work all things for good.
That reminds me of a talk that Zig Ziglar. I don't know if you ever heard of him or not, but
Oh yeah, yeah,
yeah, he was kind of the guy, when I was a young man, and I remember going to the Pepsi Center in Denver, Colorado for one of his big conferences. I'm not sure what year that was, but it was probably mid '90s, something like that. And he started talking about the importance of cultivating gratitude. And he always called the Bible the good book. I always loved it when he would say that. When I first heard him refer to the Bible as a good book, I didn't know what he was talking about. He says, you got to read your good book. You got to read the good book. And then as you listen to him and followed him for a while, okay, he's talking about the Bible. But he talked about a wall of gratitude, and that we all need to create this wall of gratitude. And he described, think back, I'm kind of tag teaming here with you, Darryl, on
yeah,
what you were talking about, that you kind of go back in your life and you think through those people that really helped you, that that really stood out. Could be a teacher, could be a coach. Obviously, could be mom, dad, grandpa, teacher, coach, neighbor, business partner, whoever. And it struck me as so real and so rich that when he got done speaking, I didn't even stick around to listen to the next speaker. I remember I went in the hallway, leaned up against the wall there, grabbed my journal, and I started writing down these names and to why. And a couple of things happened to me. Is first, I was amazed how many names that I ran out of paper. So then I decided, kind of like the NFL draft, I had to raise the bar, and I said, okay, if I'm going to have a wall of gratitude that say it's going to list 25 people, not everybody can make the cut. And
Yeah.
so and
Yeah.
so then I started, I started doing that, and it got me to thinking. And I thought, I wonder if Zig was getting us to this point. Is not only did it make me more grateful, but then I began to think, I wonder whose wall I would be on. Would I
Ooh.
be on anybody's wall?
Yeah.
And that began, to hit me in a significant way.
Mm.
And I think the other thing that I wrote down, I take pretty intensive notes because I'm at the age now where I get an idea and then just it's gone.
Yeah, that's good. I can appreciate that.
So the other thing I thought of is I think what you're talking about is, as we get older, a lot of our, security, our identity is in this thing, in this activity, in this place. And sometimes we can forget that we also have another power that God has given us that maybe hasn't been exercised enough in our older years, and call it choice, call it intentionality. I can actually choose to do something new. I can choose to do something that I've never thought I would do, but I would like to do. Or to your point, I was helped, and gosh, now I can flip that wall of gratitude and say, how can I begin, helping
Yeah,
others?
that's right.
That
Yeah.
that's certainly a great human thought, and it's certainly, within the love God, love others, overall umbrella of
Yeah,
Scripture.
for sure.
Right,
For sure.
right, yeah. Um, when did your book come out?
Actually, last month, um, January 30th was the
Okay,
launch date. Yeah, so we sat on it for a while. My publisher wanted to launch it in January, so I'd written it a while back and had it ready, and it just kind of was cooking with the publisher. They have their work to do to get it in bookstores and all that. So January 30th, 2024.
okay. Best place, Amazon, I assume, or
Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, any retailer. So it's my fourth book, and this one like I said, I set it aside for a while, and then I came back 3 months later and read it, and I'm my biggest critic, and I go, man, I like this book. I actually liked it. Like I read it again, I go, man, this was a great book. And so for that reason, I mean, I really do appreciate the content of the book. I mean, it sounds like it's a big pat on the back, but it's really just God just kind of writing the words down for the benefit of others. And I really do believe it's helpful for people to start thinking differently. We originally as Christians called people of the way, and there was a
yeah,
different way of thinking, and that hasn't gone away. There still is a different way of thinking, and specifically in the space of money. Jesus himself, he talked about money um, more than heaven and hell combined. So this is like not just an immaterial or insignificant concept, and it's we know it's always taboo to discuss, and the pulpit has a hard time translating this in a way that doesn't offend. So for me to be able to play a role in providing clarity on what this looks like in terms of taking some of these biblical truths and actually kind of blending them into the financial marketplace and what's being offered out there. Like as another example, even the health insurance marketplace has, and it's been happening for 30 years now, where there's alternatives to traditional healthcare, which are these like MediShare and Samaritan Ministry platforms that people can get health care for their family through sharing programs. And at first glance, it might seem kind of like it's not dependable, but I can attest, and the evidence is there that it's materially significant and dependable. I had a child that was not healthy, and praise God, he's healthy today. He's 18, but we had over $100,000 of medical claims on these Christian sharing programs that were paid,
Hmm.
and and then put it in context. A family of six. I've got a family. I've got four kids. If I were to go in the traditional health insurance marketplace, it would cost me maybe $1,500 a month, which is ridiculous on any middle class family. But my alternative Samaritan Ministries is about $580 a month with a $300 deductibles, for lack of a better word. So, and that's all done because the community in the body of Christ has a different way of thinking about things, and so that's just like another example. I mean, we talked earlier about like the funds and the strategies that are used to screen out companies to embrace, avoid, and be an advocate. That those tools are, very sophisticated Wall Street firm tools. But then there's also even the health insurance marketplace that has tools for Christians, and so being able to express that in the content of the book and kind of share that, it's exciting for me, and something I have to keep top of mind as the marketplace continues to innovate for Christians, and it will.
Yeah, I'm going to dive into your book a little bit here some more, but before we do, I resonate with what you're saying about your writing. I remember when I first started writing, and by the time it got to the publishing part, I hated it. I hated it. I was so sick of it. You know, um,
Yeah,
and then I would open it up and I would read it, and then I'd get angry with the editors because I would look at a sentence and say, why didn't someone raise their hand? That sentence could have been read better, right? So that's like when you're
yeah, for
you're your worst
sure.
your worst critic. But then you know um, when you write, sometimes it's kind of like this Sunday I'll be speaking twice on Saturday, three times on Sunday, and if your notes aren't clear, once you get a few messages in, you forget whether you said this or didn't say this, or right. and,
Yes.
and so I picked up the first book I wrote one time to say, did I already cover the story? It's not like it would be wrong to repeat it again, but I remember picking it up, and I go, gosh, this is good. This is good. Which is interesting because I was no longer reading it really from a critical
Yeah.
perspective. That water had already gone under the bridge, and now I was reading it as a receiver of it. I went, oh, that's a good thing. It's funny how that came out of me, and I probably really haven't been practicing that the last year or two. And you get convicted by your own writing.
It's so true because, yeah, you spend so much time being a critic and
Yeah,
adjust, you don't really read the book. You're
right.
just you're just doing work, and then when you take a step back, you're like, "Oh, this is great."
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah.
so I
And
I I like
yeah, and you almost have a so what when you do run into something that you would have, stated differently. You go,
yeah,
so
yeah.
what, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Yeah.
All right, so let's dive into the book. So in the book, I imagine you talk about things like tithing. You talk about probably generosity, debt service, your views on debt, your attitudes towards wealth. Um, tease us a little bit about
Yeah.
some of these things.
Well, so, one of the things that happened for us that really was a good tailwind when we first got started was, we had a good relationship with Dave Ramsey out of Nashville. And so I was on his advisory council for a number of years, and he just endorsed the heck out of PAX, our company.
Mm, fantastic.
And we since disengaged from his endorsement service very amicably, but we were building our own identity at a certain point. And but prior to that, not having an identity and leaning on his influence was, I mean, I'm so grateful to him and what he's done for our organization. And I'm also grateful for what he's done in my life when it comes to debt. There was a point where, I was working for a big firm, and I was making pretty decent money. And just like any, I guess, superstar athlete, you're going to spend if you've never had money. So I had a nice BMW convertible, and I had a lot of credit card debt. And so I always thought Dave Ramsey was somebody that was only for people who weren't sophisticated financially.
Yeah.
And so I kind of had this arrogant point of view with Dave. But then when I was struggling with a young family in debt, we went all in. My family and I went all in on envelopes and this debt snowball. And so I'm a firm believer and in in Ramsey's approach. And regarding debt in the Word of God, debt's um, you're not going to go to hell for debt, first of all.
Yeah.
But you just have to be careful with the thing, and especially in business. And so there's plenty of people what's interesting about men in business is that, like, we place bets, for lack of a better word, and then we get this sense of, we win. Maybe we did a real estate deal, or maybe we won here in this business. And I'm a victim. I'm guilty of this as well. And then we're like, okay, we've got this skill, so we kind of put more chips on the table. And sometimes we're like, you know what, I can even pull this off, and then I'm going to borrow money to do it. And there hits this inflection point. I've seen it with men over the years where it's like a big mistake, and you can't unwind it, and it ruins your life, and all the good work you had done prior to that is all for naught. And it's usually debts associated with that. So I'm really sensitive and careful with that. I'm not probably as dogmatic as Dave, but when I read the scriptures, I know that it's dangerous. So that's kind of my view on debt. I'll pause there, and then I want to get into giving and tithing, because that's a little bit more fun.
Yeah, thank you. I think that I was trying to remember his name. In fact, I was trying to Google it here while I was listening to you. But the Dave Ramsey's before Dave Ramsey. One name is Ron Blue. I remember
Yeah, Ron
Ron
Blue.
Blue. But there was
Yeah.
another fella. For some reason, Bill Burkett sticks
Larry
in my
Burkett.
Larry Burkett. Yeah, there
Yeah,
we
Larry
go.
Burkett.
Larry Burkett. And I think what comes to mind, the where these three individuals. I think Ron was little more moderate, and
Yeah.
Ron Blue is a little more moderate, as I recall. But what I think is really strong about that, I know that at our church, we promote Dave Ramsey's stuff, at least in
Mhm.
word, and maybe every once in a while. I think when there's a couple in trouble, we often point them to that. What I what I appreciate about Ramsey's approach is I think it really speaks to young people um, who whose discretionary cash is squeezed, and who haven't really learned the principles of wealth building. And so I think that I think that's a really strong target market for them. And I remember in the days my wife and we had a very detailed budget, and I don't want to mislead anybody. You may disagree with this, I don't know, but I don't do that anymore. I mean, I uh, my wife and I have been debt free for I can't remember how many decades. And what I mean by debt free is I might be carrying a note on something, but I'm doing it strategically, and the money's there if I need it to do that. But to these guys' credit, it's the principles that
Mhm.
I learned back when I was a young man, that helped me in that way. I wanted to throw this out there too, though. Now, being a banker, I also have to say that some of the worst credit risks I ever dealt with, and I'm going to probably get hate mail for this, were the professionals, and dentists, doctors. Now,
Yeah.
this was a day where a lot of them operated more independently than they do today. Now they're swallowed up by business, and they're organized under HMOs and whatnot. But just because somebody makes more money doesn't mean that they're navigating the waters of finance in the right way. It was always amazing to me how a guy back in the 80s, Darryl, making $500,000 a year, still couldn't make ends meet.
Mm.
And it was ridiculous. So that's what I mean by the principles. And so I don't want to say you outgrow the Dave Ramsey, stuff, because that feels a little sacrilegious. But I think that those principles are ingrained to where, it's just bigger blocks, that
Yeah.
that you're working with.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Yeah, let's continue. So, how often? I mean, I got questions like, how do people find you? You just said that your brand now seems to be standing up on its own, pretty
Yeah.
well. So that's a hint, in that direction. But how do people find you, and how comfortable are these conversations? And maybe that's the process you were talking about. I mean, do they just come in and talk about investing? It sounds to me like with your process, you're kind of helping them get a broader, you're trying to get a broader picture of where they're at, where they want to go, and then the principles along the way.
Yeah, an ideal scenario, we engage with the spouse. That's always
Yeah.
that's always the biggest challenge is how can we have that what we would consider non-CFO spouse have a voice
Hmm.
in the financial future, even the legacy. And so we have to get to that's an ideal point of our engagement is where we've got both spouse kind of on the same page and we're just kind of collaborating together, kind of as a thinking partner. But to kind of start the engagement, we just do a 15-minute. It's almost like just is it a good fit call, and so we have 10 advisors, and so one of the advisors would connect with a prospective client and just have a 15-minute conversation. Here's kind of what we do, and let me understand your situation. What are you looking for, and just find out if it's a good fit. So that's our onboarding process, the beginning of the onboarding process.
I had never heard that before. I like that terminology, the non-CFO, piece of that marriage, that relationship. That's really good. I know that in our family, that's kind of my mind. So I'm kind of the mastermind behind it all. But I know that for a lot of good reasons, my wife Rhonda needs to be involved in that process. One is, the odds are I'll be leaving this earth before she does. And it's important that she knows what the heck is going on and why. Um, but even more so, she has a lot of good um, things to add to the conversation that I often sometimes don't think about. What might be of greater value to me isn't to her. And when I learn those things, I do better. I know that when we meet with our advisor, it is we
Yeah, it's
meet
good.
together and do that. Um,
It's good.
yeah, yeah, that's great. So in your and I like what you said about debt. What about the whole wealth perspective, right? Someone comes in and they're trying to figure out, can they pivot, as you said, can they pivot with a $1 million net worth versus someone that comes in and they've got a $5 million net worth, and some, of course, will have 20 and more. Um, um, how often do you see that? How much do people struggle with? Do I have enough to make this pivot? Isn't that like a big question?
Yeah, that's kind of like the fundamental question.
Right.
So there's probably several questions that are there as well. So not only do I have enough, sometimes it's what is enough, because like if you get to a point and you don't know the answer to that question, there's this kind of fear that you just kind of have to keep saving or don't ever retire. I've had some people that were extremely wealthy, and had we not sat down and gone through the math, I don't think they would have ever retired because they had this fear that was
Mm,
rooted in their childhood that would never have enough.
that is so good. So not purpose, but fear.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, keep going with that.
And so when we can unpack it cerebrally, and using different modeling tools, and get to a place, okay, not only do you have enough, um, and then there's of course the alternatives where you don't have enough, and we just have to navigate through that. I mean, people generally know they don't have enough, so it's not like we're telling them something they don't know. It's just like, okay, yeah, we confirm you don't have enough, and here's some ways that we can, live life. It's not despair. It's just this is where you're at. Um, in all reality, we're the richest nation in the history of the world. So, not having enough for retirement is not the end of the world for anybody. It's just, what type of strategy do we need to have going forward? Do we need to leverage the equity in the house? Do we need to part-time work? Do we need to sell some stuff? Like there's just thinking that we have to do. But the first question is, do we have enough? What is enough? What is too much? Sometimes then it's the next question. Okay, so let's say we do have enough. Um, what do we do with the rest? Do we give it to the kids? And if it is the kids, how much is enough for the kids? And we kind of figure that out, and then okay, we've got enough for the kids. That's plenty. Now, what do we do with the rest? And who do we give it to? And then it even gets to okay, um, what's the are there some tax strategies of maybe even giving some today versus later?
Hmm.
So let's look at some of those tax strategies that may exist. And so it's um, it's definitely a journey because it can be overwhelming when we kind of throw all this stuff. I mean, not only are we doing some of this legacy planning, we're also doing the biblical responsible investing and Medicare. So there's a lot of pieces. So we try to adopt our cadence in such a way that people can absorb it, and but it does encompass those big questions: what is enough? What's enough for the kids? And what do I do with the rest?
Do you sometimes have to partner with other professionals to, like, say, recommend and set up a charitable trust for somebody, um, um, and kind of have some of those in your inner circle, or do people kind of bring those professional relationships with them?
No, we've got a lot of tight relationships we've had over the years,
Yeah.
and we're not limited to those. But as an example, we use one of the tools that we like to use is called a donor advised fund, and that allows people to put money in a charitable fund, receive an immediate tax deduction in that calendar year, but they're still scratching their head on what charity to give it to or what church, and so they're not ready to give it, but they need the tax deduction. So that's a really cool strategy. There's a number of different nuances to it, but the reason I mention that is because if we use a secular strategy, let's say Fidelity or Schwab, um, there's a risk that when a Christian wants to make a donation from that fund to a nonprofit, that secular organization could say, not going to let you send it to that nonprofit because we've just pulled up this latest hate list from the
Mm,
Southern Poverty Law Association, and
wow.
focus on the family is on the hate list. So I know you want to give your money to a nonprofit, but we're not going to let you. So because that risk exists in the secular marketplace, we like to partner with Christian-based donor advised funds because it reduces that risk.
Darryl, you need to go over that again. You need to restate what you just said, because I did not know that. And if I did not know that, I know a lot of people don't know that. So let's go over that again. I kind of teed it up with the idea of a charitable trust because I have clients who have charitable trust, and I kind of understand how it works a little bit. How it works. I certainly understand how a living trust works because we have one, but what you said is really powerful. Go ahead and restate it. And then I have another question, comment before we sign off.
Yeah, sure. So a donor advised fund is like a fund. It's a way for you to give money, or you can give other assets to it and receive an immediate tax deduction in the calendar year, a charitable tax deduction. But you're still scratching your head saying, I don't know what ministries or nonprofits to give to. This is a lot of money. I need to think through that, but I need my tax deduction. So you put the money in, you get the deduction in that calendar year, and then you make a distribution or charitable distribution from it down the road. I actually have one myself, and I do it on my phone right now.
Okay.
And but the entity that's responsible for holding that money, which is typically called a custodian, there's Christian versions and then there's secular versions. The secular versions will reference a hate list, sometimes from the Southern Poverty Law Association, and Christian organizations that um, express their deeply held convictions, like marriage and other things. They show up on those hate lists, Focus on the Family, Alliance Defending Freedom. And so if you wanted to make a distribution from that to a charity that's important to you, you could find that secular organization says, no, we're not going to allow that distribution to take place because we're not going to support hate. And so for that reason, I prefer to use Christian-based donor-advised funds.
That is big. If we didn't accomplish anything today, we did right there. I think we educated in a huge way. At least I was educated. I had no idea that that was actually a thing. I can taste it in the water. I can smell it in the air, but I did not realize that it's in the food that I'm eating already. So that's that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. All right, so um, I almost feel like this has been a session for me. So
Well, you're good at asking questions because you've got insight into this space, and so it's really fluid for me too. So thank you.
great. So it seems as though the way I would wrap this up is that it seems to me that the math plus one's preferences and maybe discovered purpose, those things do come to a manageable conclusion. But it takes we need assistance from somebody like you. We need help to say, how does that math actually work? And here are my preferences. And I'll give you an example. So how many at my age, in their 60s, or even a little younger, and they're empty nesters, maybe they're 45 and they're an empty nester, to my age, or even 70s. And that new phrase is not that new, but it's that phrase of downsizing. We hear about downsizing. So we're sitting on a piece of property that is way bigger than we need, extremely expensive, but we have it now in a manageable place in our portfolio where downsizing, when it comes to your monthly budget, may not even be a real thing. It may not be a savings, because if you're going to move somewhere closer to medical facilities or to where your grandkids live, the homes are more expensive. And so though you buy a smaller house, and you're also in a tax area there where the taxes are more expensive. And so now you are, but to be fair, you also know to keep up your property, you probably are spending more than you realize. And so all of these things kind of need to be thought about. And
They do.
it does get a little complicated.
Yeah, I've got a worksheet on my website at PAX Financial Group. It's a cash flow worksheet that we as advisors we've developed over the years. It's an Excel spreadsheet, anybody can do it, but it's just one that we've been using as we've worked with a lot of people that can just kind of organize your budget in such a way that you can think through your income relative to your expenses.
Yeah. Some people are like my wife and I, where we're very anal. So the house is going to be painted inside and out. The windows are going to be cleaned. The landscaping is going to be maintained. The garage is going to be anally done this way and that way. So, the house is a cash sucker that just keeps on sucking. And
Yes.
it's almost like maybe we need to downsize just for the sake of our anal selves
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
contain the discretionary, leak, right?
That's so funny. It's true that at least you know yourself. I think self-awareness is kind of the first step.
Yeah. Well, Darryl, it was so awesome meeting you today. Give me the URL where people can find your company. What is the website?
PAX, it's Paul Apple X-ray financialgroup.com.
Beautiful.
PAX is
Beautiful.
Latin for peace. Yeah.
Beautiful. Great. Well, you have provided a lot of insight, a lot of things to think about. I definitely think you are a great fit for the Today Counts show. I wish you the best. Bless you. And I wouldn't be surprised if we don't touch base in the near future.
Yeah, anytime. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. If you're not part of the Lead Today community, let me invite you. Go to leadtodaycommunity.com. That's leadtodaycommunity.com and sign up for Monday Moments. It's a weekly email that will encourage your leadership. Again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for telling a friend about the Today Counts show.